Well, good morning, everyone. I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there, and I'll just make it God knew what He was doing when He created womanhood. It was very clear. And in fact, Adam's reaction when he saw Eve basically said God knew what He was doing. So this week something happened. It was a same realization about the same time between my wife and I that we were. I was here at church; she was at home, and kind of together we realized that on Monday, probably it was around noon, 30, where it basically said, "Hey, we don't have a kid in their teens anymore." Our youngest turned 20 on Monday, so. I will tell you, she's having a little bit harder time of it than I am. I'm actually really, really good with our kids getting older. Just share with you, when we dropped our oldest child off at college, we weren't even a mile away from the college, and Tara goes, "How do you feel about adoption?" And I said, "We just got rid of one." That's the point. They leave, right? So I'm actually good with that. But I actually began to think a little bit about parenting this week, and as I'm really kind of focusing in on the book of Galatians, I thought about parenting. And parenting, you'll get this if you're a parent, this is a multifaceted approach. You got to come at this thing with all sort of angles. And one of them is sometimes you have to have coming to Jesus meetings. And if you don't know what a coming to Jesus meeting is, it's a butt chewing. And sometimes as a parent, and I wish I had some of those back, but sometimes you got to do that. And sometimes you get historical. Like my kids do something stupid, and they've done something stupid, and I share how I've done something stupid in hopes that they don't repeat the same stupid stuff that I have done. Sometimes you put out a logical argument. In fact, you lay out like the logical argument, I am right, you are wrong, in hopes that they have an aha experience like, oh man, I'm an idiot. Most of the time doesn't happen, but you give it the old college try. And sometimes, and maybe you'll get this, sometimes your heart breaks and bleeds for your kids. Sometimes you're heartbroken and it comes out and they know that you're heartbroken. And when I think about the Apostle Paul, as he's writing the book of Galatians, one of the things that really kind of comes out is, as much as he's their pastor, he's also their spiritual parent. And if you read the book of Galatians, it's kind of hard to see this, but at the very beginning of the book of Galatians, it's their coming to Jesus meeting. I mean, he is chewing some serious rear when he begins the book, and then after that, he gets historical. He shares his life, he shares his story, he shares his experience, and then with that, after he's done with that, hoping that they get on the right path, he lays out his logical argument. In fact, there are 7 logical arguments that he lays out to basically say, I'm right and you're wrong, and in hopes that they take the right path. And then eventually he gets to the place where he's brokenhearted for them. And we're going to look at that moment right here today. And I was thinking about this earlier. Paul is heartbroken for the church, and his heart bleeds for the church. And quite honestly, this is what we need in church leaders. We need people who love the church and are faithful to God's word. And really, that's where Paul is. And so we're going to begin looking at Galatians chapter 4, starting with verse 8 here today. That's page 974 in the Bibles in the seats in front of you. But let's go ahead and dig in. We're going to read through the first part of verse 9, starting with verse 8 here today. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. but now that you have come to know God, rather to be known by God. So Paul kind of lays out, again, their past life was all part of the pantheon of gods within the Greco-Roman system. And they worship these, kind of fake gods, but in the process, they were enslaved to them. But in coming to know Jesus, coming to know about Jesus, they came to know Jesus, and with that, they were also known by God. And it's interesting that the word know comes up 3 times in a verse and a half. And so basically what he is saying is you've left this place where there's a bunch of gods that are fake gods, and you know Jesus. And in knowing Jesus, you know God. And in knowing God, you are known by God. Now, when I hear about that statement, known by God, I always think, well, God's, He's like omnipotent, and He's all-powerful, and He's everywhere. Why wouldn't He know everything about me? But the idea here is not this intellectual knowledge that God has. The idea of knowing implies relationship. It implies fellowship. It implies that you are actively engaged and seek to love and to care. And so through Jesus, we actively love and care about God. And by Jesus, or through Jesus, God knows us, He cares about us, and He loves us. Now, this is not earth-shattering to us, but would have been earth-shattering to them. Because the pantheon of gods, it's not about God knowing you and having an intimate walk with you. It's all about tamping down the anger and rage of the gods. But now they've entered into this system, this new relationship with Jesus, that it's not about like manipulating God out of His rage or anger. It's a loving, caring, mutuality sort of relationship. And this was earth-shattering to them. And so this is what they have entered into. And when he says that you've entered into this, we get to the rest of verse 9 through verse 11, and it says this. He says, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you have become once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I'm afraid I have labored over you in vain. Now, when he says, I'm afraid I've labored over you in vain, it's not like God's this manipulative, or Paul's being this manipulative parent that's like, I don't know why I've done all the work in the first place. He's not there. He's literally saying, if you're abandoning the truth of Jesus so quickly, why did I work so hard? And he's saying, how can you go back? Now, if you look at their life and existence, here's where they were. They were enslaved to a system of religion where there was like all these gods, and all these gods enslaved them by saying, listen, you got to do all this stuff. And then they went to Jesus, and they know Jesus, and they know God, but then this group comes along. And this group comes along and says, no. What you really need to do is you need to follow the law. You need to follow the law of God. And what Paul does, even though the law is from God, he puts the law in the category of idolatry. That if you think that you can attain salvation through obeying the law, you're going to shut the door to Jesus, and you're going to become enslaved as you were before. That's what he's basically saying. And so one of the things that we have to grasp today in our current world is there will always be useless and weak ideologies promising salvation apart from or in addition to Jesus. Now, some will say, well, you can't have Jesus at all, but many will say, well, it's Jesus, but it's Jesus plus all of this stuff. And there's always going to be competing ideologies. For them, it was legalism. And legalism takes a moral and ethical code and says that your salvation hinges on how well you obey this moral and ethical code. And for these Christians, it was Jewish people coming with the Jewish law, the law that God had given in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and basically saying, yeah, it's this right here. You got to obey this right here. And if you don't obey all the stuff in here, you're not going to heaven. Your salvation is dependent upon this right here. Now, with this, I think it's important that we understand, Jim brilliantly stated this last week, the law is not evil. It's just inadequate. It's not evil. In fact, I'll even go as far as to say the law is good. I spent the last couple months of my life working through the first 5 books of the Bible, and it's almost like God put up incredible guardrails with the law. And basically what he did is, like, in case your mind goes way over here and you think, maybe I ought to, don't. It will not end well for you. So the law is good. And really the law was intended to help us love God and love our neighbor, but they made it into a tool of attaining salvation rather than an expression of our faith in Jesus. And so when they were obeying the legal code, and that was their path to salvation, ultimately they were shutting the door to Jesus. But let me ask this question, because for them it was legalism, for you it might be legalism, that you're really struggling with thinking, I've got to be good enough, and I've got to attain salvation through the law. Let me ask this question, though. What in our world today promises salvation apart from Jesus? And I'll even go, let's make this a little bit more personal. What are you struggling with? What is asking for attention in your life that is really wanting to say salvation is found here and not in the person of Jesus? So I want to talk about, we've talked about legalism. I want to talk about some isms here today, some ideologies that I think compete for our loyalty. They compete for our attention and ultimately end up shutting the door to Jesus. So one of those is humanism. Humanism places the primary goal of life in human fulfillment. Solomon sought a life of humanism and said, here's the end of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, like walk with God. That was kind of like, I live for the glory of God. But what humanism does says what really matters is the fulfillment of my flesh, that I get out of life what I want out of life. Now, humanism as an ideology, as a term, is fairly new, but it is not new. In fact, you go back as, Romans chapter 1, Paul talks about the fact that humanity has exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And when you exchange the truth of God for a lie, it opens your mind, it opens your life to all kinds of sinister and dark thoughts and sinister and dark activities. And basically what we see in our world today with humanism is we basically see sinister ideas, sinister ways of life, dark ideologies coming into play. It basically places self as God, that what really matters is me. And what matters more than anything is my fulfillment and my happiness. And so with this can really kind of take on a lot of tentacles. We find addictions, and we find power, and we find wealth, and we find sex, and all of these different things. But what we find, I really think, going on in our culture today, people are saying, how in the world did we get here? Well, how in the world we got here was 200 some years ago. People started listening to Nietzsche and Marx and Freud and so on like that. But basically, we find the fruit of humanism going on in our world in that identity has become the biggest god, the biggest idol in our culture today. And so when we talk about identity would say, like, listen, Instead of saying my identity is founded in the fact that I am created by God, I'm in the image of God, it's like, no, it's my race, it's my ethnicity, it's my nationality, it's my gender, it's all of these things. And so what we've done in our culture today is to say, if you don't like the God of who you are in yourself, create a new one. To the place where people are going to different genders. People are even saying that they belong to a specific ethnicity or race when they really don't. Like, we check as many boxes as we can to create this incredible God in the eyes of ourselves. So that's humanism, and that's the full birth of humanism, or the full fruit. But there's other isms that come into play. This one will probably stretch a lot of us in the church. Political isms. It's things like nationalism, globalism, socialism, communism, capitalism. It's basically the belief that the right government ideology will bring me completeness, wholeness, and salvation. That if we just have this in place, all is going to be right with the world. And I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be whole. And one of the things, it really doesn't matter what your political leaning is. I'm going to say this: every man-made political, social ideology has holes in it, is imperfect, and will ultimately disappoint people. And I'll even go as far as to say every man-made political, social ideology has winners and losers. And so I'm going to share it like this, and there is only one. There is only one who can govern perfectly. There is only one who can create the perfect government political system that benefits everyone, and it's Jesus. Every other one is going to disappoint you. I'm going to share another ism here this morning: materialism. So I grew up going to church camp and youth group in the 1980s. And I'm just going to tell you, it was like this, constant cycle of the same message over and over and over. I grew up going to Ashland Christian Service Camp in Ashland, Kansas. You've never been to Ashland, Kansas? Think Death Valley, Kansas. They said, what's the hottest, driest, windiest place in the entire state? Let's put a church camp there. Even better, let's put a church camp right north of the grain elevators when there's always a 20-mile-an-hour wind coming up out of the south. That was church camp. And I thought it was great. But there was always a guy there. His name was Randy. And Randy always had a record player. And this record player was able to play backwards. And some of you know where I'm going with this. The songs that you play backwards, the 80s and 70s metal and so on, where they found this like obscure straighten, right? There was like this satanic message within this, and it's like, if you listen to rock music, you're like this horrible person. I must be a horrible person. But then there were so many messages about don't drink and don't smoke and don't chew, and you understand the rest of it, or hang out with girls who do, right? There was all kinds of messages of don't do drugs and don't have sex. And it was just like the constant drip of youth group. You know what I never heard? I never heard that money and the love of money is the root of all kind of evil. I never heard that material possessions and financial wealth will fade. In fact, really the message, some of you who grew up in the 80s know that it was all about more money, more power, more stuff, bigger house, faster cars, all this kind of stuff. Never heard that this stuff will not make your life complete. But there are many people, even still today, that are living for this notion and idea that if I have more money, more power, more stuff, bigger house, better job, my life will be complete. And there are many people today chasing after that ism in the world. Now, we could talk about more, but all of these things promise salvation, but end in slavery. They end in slavery because they promise a salvation that only Jesus can bring. Basically, one of the things that Timothy Keller said in his book, Galatians for You, whatever you worship will enslave you. So you can either be a slave to Jesus, which is a good thing, or you're going to be enslaved by something. And these will demand more loyalty and more from you than what you are willing or able to give. So now Paul, as he kind of goes on, becomes passionate. More passionate. Let's notice verse 12. Brothers, I entreat you. Now, I don't know how I can say this, but if you could just imagine Paul is bleeding emotion here. He is pleading with them. And then he goes on to say this, become as I am, for I have also become as you are. Paul's basically saying, I became a Gentile. I have forsaken the law. He says, you did me no wrong. You know that it was because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but you received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus. What then has become of the blessing you felt? For I testify to you that if possible, you would have gouged out your own eyes and given them to me. So we get a little bit of the backstory of maybe how the Galatian church came to be. And this is kind of interesting that maybe Paul wasn't intending to stay there as long as he did. Maybe he wasn't really intending to be there at all, but he got sick. And he stuck there, and he was able to tell them about the gospel. He was able to tell them about Jesus, and they found this new freedom and this new life and this wonderful thing that happened when there was the Word of God and the Spirit working in people's lives. He's like, listen, I got sick, and I became a burden to you, and you didn't. It wasn't a scornful thing. It wasn't you despised that you were having to take care of me. Your love for Jesus compelled you to do this. And he's like, listen, this had nothing to do with obeying a rule. This had everything to do it was everything to do with listening to the Spirit and following the leading of the Spirit. And it was good. And why in the world would you leave that fellowship, that one another, that community, that love for Jesus, and make it all about rules? Why would you do that? And then, as he's done with this, we get to verses 16 and 17. Paul says, have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? It kind of reaches into a very human reaction when people tell us difficult things about ourselves. I don't know that anybody is like, I just wish somebody would tell me more tough stuff about me that's not good. Most of the time when somebody tells us something that we don't like about ourselves, what's the initial reaction? You're a jerk, right? That's kind of how we react when somebody's, I was like, we view them as our enemy. And Paul's like, listen, I'm telling you tough stuff, but I'm not your enemy. But I want to tell you about those people who are telling you about these things that are leading you away from Jesus. Notice verse 17. They make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. I want to leave this up here, and we could spend a whole long time talking about this, but they make much of you. But if you go back to the very last statement and just kind of erase those other two in the middle, they make much of you that you may make much of them. They don't have your benefit in their minds. This is all about them. They make much of you, and they have ulterior motives. They're no good purpose. And their purpose is to shut the door to Jesus and ingratiate themselves to you. They want the glory. They want to shut the door to Jesus. And so one of the things that Paul is saying about the false teachers is, listen, they don't care about you. They don't care about your walk with Jesus. In fact, they want to shut the door to Jesus to make themselves look better in their eyes. So let me tell you something about Brandon Schaefer. I don't tell you this to make myself look good, because I know me and I know that I'm not all that. And if you want to know that, talk to my wife, talk to my kids, talk to my coworkers. They'll tell you the truth. I'm not all that. But I will tell you, there was a lot of my life. There was a lot of my life that I spent really focused on political ideology. In fact, very early in life. In fact, I was known for my conservative, right-leaning ideology, so much so that I've told you I graduated with a class of 15 people. And so one of the things that we did when we graduated, every senior class got a senior prophecy. It was kind of a joke, ha ha ha, kind of poking fun at who people were and what it was going to be like when we come back for our 20-year high school reunion. And so my senior prophecy was, Senator Schaefer will arrive in his bulletproof limousine. And so I was very passionate, and I followed politics to maybe the nth degree. And I'll even go as far as to tell you that there was probably a time in my preaching where I was as passionate about preaching a political line than I would have been the Bible. And I have repented of that, and I am so sorry that that's what I used to be. In fact, I was in small group not too long ago when one of the people in our small group said, I almost left the church because I got tired of hearing about your political party. Somewhere along the line, and I don't know when it was, and I'll tell you, I'm still informed. I'm still in the know about what's going on. I sometimes may want to go there. But I realized something about those who are seeking my loyalty, who are jockeying and maneuvering so that I will put my faith in them. I realize they really don't care about me. They really, really don't. I realize that what they're doing is promising salvation through them. So hard talk, and this isn't just about politics. This is about all the isms and the ideologies that are out there, whether it be materialism or humanism, and all the many tenets of all of that. These are promising salvation that only Jesus can give. And at the end of the day, I understand that these isms and ideologies can't give what only Jesus can give. I realize that all of these isms and ideologies, they really don't care about me. I don't care about you. And at the end of the day, they enslave us and shut the door to Jesus. And so with that in mind, I think we have to, again, see where Paul is and what his goal is, what should be the goal of the church. It says in verses 18 through 20, it is always good to be made much of for a good purpose. In other words, there's something there about putting focus and attention on people, elevating people, encouraging people. And not only when I am present with you. My little children, again, this is the parenting thing coming out. This is heart breaking and bleeding for them. My little children, for whom I am in anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you. Notice verse 19, Paul's passion. I'm coming to you as a parent. I'm coming to you in labor pains for you. And please understand what I want for you. I don't want for you to walk away saying, I love Paul so much, or Paul is so great. What Paul wants is them to be formed in Jesus. What Paul wants is for them not just to stay where they are, but to grow up in Jesus and be transformed by Jesus and live for Jesus. And what Paul wants for you and what Jesus wants for you is not for you to be enslaved by isms and ideologies, but that you will be mature and complete followers of Jesus, transformed by the resurrection, transformed by the cross of Christ. What he wants for you as a parent, and maybe you'll get this as a parent, he wants more for you than what you want for yourself. And so it really kind of comes down, we're almost to our bottom line. But before we get to our bottom line, I just want to remind you, only Jesus brings salvation and freedom. Only Jesus. All other isms and ideologies bring destruction and slavery. Listen, if we make the church something other than Jesus, we are sorely missing the point. I was on the phone with my oldest son yesterday, and he said something about there are too many churches that hold political rallies, and that's both right and left, under the flag of a worship service. Let it never be anything other than Jesus and Jesus only. And so our bottom line is this: any path to salvation apart from or in addition to Jesus shuts the door to Jesus. If we try to make it something other than Jesus, it's not like we can kind of ride the fence and do both of these. In fact, Paul, as he finishes this section, he goes in and he talks about really two paths in life. He's like a good preacher, and he says it comes down to either this or this. In fact, he shares that Abraham actually had two sons. See, God had promised Abraham a son, and as he promised Abraham a son, he said, listen, I'm going to give you a son, and God was taking a long time. And so Sarah goes to Abraham and says, maybe it's through my servant girl Hagar that you're going to have a son. And so he sleeps with her, and he has Ishmael. And then God says, no, it's not through Ishmael. I'm going to give you a son. And eventually, Abraham and Sarah have Isaac. And basically what Paul does is say, listen, there's two paths. You see, Ishmael, that's a path of slavery. And Isaac is a path of freedom. And freedom is only through Jesus and Jesus alone. And so he's like, you got to decide. And so my question to you today is, what is it going to be? Is it Jesus or Jesus and? Is it Jesus alone, or is it going to be Jesus and I'm going to add all this other stuff to it? What is it going to be? And I think one of the things, listen folks, I think one of the problems that we get into, one of the challenges we get into, is we hold on to the day that we chose Jesus. But one of the realities is it's not just about the day that we said yes to Jesus, it's the day after and the day after and the day after. Like Jesus even said, listen, take up your cross what? Daily, and follow me. So I'm going to challenge you with this here today. Choose Jesus this day and each day. Today's Sunday, so we're going to check off this day for Jesus for you, at least for this morning. But what about tomorrow? And what about tomorrow's tomorrow? Listen, I know I can look at my life. It was December 26, 1982. It's ingrained into my memory. December 26, 1982, I had on a white leisure suit. Okay? There is photographic evidence of such somewhere, I hope never finds the light of day. Had a blue, like butterfly collar shirt and hush puppies on. I don't know why it's hush puppies, but I specifically remember those. And I walked up to the front of the church at the end of the church service, and I expressed my faith and belief in Jesus, and I was baptized into Him. And it would be really easy for me to just say on that day, I chose Jesus. But I can look back to the, 40-some years and tell you there's been a lot of todays and a lot of tomorrows that I held on to isms and ideologies that enslaved me and didn't live for Jesus. And maybe if you look at your story, you say much the same. And so with that in mind, I think we have to get real about the isms and ideologies that are competing for the allegiance of our heart. Here's what I know. Whether it be family, whether it be marriage, whether it be job, whether it be politics, whether it be pleasure and fulfillment of self, there is something seeking the allegiance of your heart. And whatever is seeking the allegiance of your heart is asking more of you than you can ever give. And the more it demands from you, the more it will shut the door to Jesus. Jesus said as much. In Matthew chapter 26, He said this, "No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money." And so if it is not money, it is something seeking to enslave your heart, seeking the allegiance of your heart. And so maybe ask a couple of questions. Maybe ask the question, what do I daydream about? Maybe it's that. What do I think about when there's nothing else to think about? Now, I'll tell you, some of you moms probably don't have that space, but some of the guys know, oh yeah, I got that. I've got that nothing spot in my brain. What are you thinking about then? What can you not wait to bring up in conversation? What do you complain about? What gets your if-then statements? Like if I had $100 more a week, then. If my kids would just, then. If my spouse would, then. If the dingbats in Washington would just, then. And then I want to challenge you on this. Do a self-audit. What gets your heart? What gets your heart, get your hands. What gets your heart, get your feet, your focuses, your finances, and your time. What do you do with your hands? Where do you go with your feet? What gets the focus of your mind? What gets your finances? And so with that, go back to your purchase history for the last 3 months on Amazon. What gets your money? What gets your time? 9:05 every Sunday morning, I get a little notification on my phone, tells me how much screen time I've had that week. Let's go to God in prayer.